Many Canadians have become increasingly aware of the stranglehold that regulatory colleges have had on various professionals, but none more apparent than the way medical professionals were compelled to unquestionably uphold all public health diktats in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic pandemonium under the threat of investigation and discipline. I'm Tamara Ugolini with Rebel News, and you may be familiar with my reporting on this topic. From Ontario doctors Apgar Khan, Patrick Phillips, Dr. Mark Trosey, and Crystal Lutchkew, who were all previously licensed Ontario doctors that faced reprimand from the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, that's also known as the CPSO, for simply questioning the COVID status quo and advocating for individual patients over groupthink hysteria that devastated social, physical, and mental health alike. The case that I'm featuring today is Dr. Kulvinder Kaur Gill, who recently had her disciplinary hearings dropped completely by the CPSO, signaling a potential change in how regulated medical professionals can restore individual patient care again amid those harshly imposed public health commands. Joining me now to discuss this case is the lawyer on the file, Lisa Bildy, who has been able to assist Dr. Gill with help from the registered Canadian charity called the Democracy Fund. Check it out.
Well, the key takeaway is that this can be a very long and grueling process when your regulator decides that they want to investigate you for, in this case, it's for speaking out on controversial or debatable topics. It is a very long, drawn-out process, or it can be, and it has been for Dr. Gill. So she actually had two separate proceedings, and it's been pretty much ongoing since August of 2020, when there were a number of people who complained about some of the tweets that she had been putting out there about lockdowns and that sort of thing. So there was an investigation, first of all, by her college that looked at all of her communications, and then that went on to the they have something called the Inquiries, Complaints and Reports Committee, ICRC. That's a screening committee that determines whether something should go on to discipline. And in the first instance, for those first few tweets, they decided to issue cautions, which is the highest level of warning that can come out of that committee. And it is a public censure of a doctor. So it goes on her permanent record, goes on the internet, so anybody could see it. It isn't private at all, and also they send these cautions around to all the other regulatory bodies or hospitals and so on all across North America. So people like to say, and especially with the Jordan Peterson case, which was a sort of similar thing, oh, this isn't really discipline, this is just an opportunity to correct the physician or the professional in terms of their behavior and give them some direction. But it is very much a strike against their reputation. And so she has been challenging those cautions, and she's gone up through the Health Professions Appeal and Review Board. They upheld the cautions, and now we're off to the divisional court on that one. So that was the first set of proceedings. Then the second investigation was started right after the ICRC's decision in the first one. They began another investigation, and this was with respect to ongoing and further tweets, so this is all related to online communications, nothing to do with her practice, her patients, anything like that. And that one, we made very extensive submissions in response, and that went on to the ICRC to review, and they sent it on to discipline. So that's where we were with that one. It was going to a disciplinary hearing. We scheduled it for 15 days starting at the end of January of next year, and then just suddenly out of the blue this week, it was withdrawn. Two of the proceedings were investigations only by her registrar, so they're initiated internally. And then in the first instance, there were a number of complaints, but they were just strangers on the internet, basically, who filed these complaints.
Well, it seems like the regulators across the country, but especially here in Ontario with the CPSO, have really meddled in a doctor's ability to provide direct patient care based on an evidence-based approach, which is something that I believe Dr. Gill strongly advocated for throughout the pandemonium and on her public Twitter account. And yet the CPSO is leaning on stranger complaints to as a tool to meddle in that direct patient relationship, whereas the patients themselves aren't actually bringing forth any complaints. And I understand that Dr. Gill had a clear patient record and a clear record of conduct prior to this investigation.
To be fair, it isn't just the CPSO that's going down this path. There are many other regulators. This is a symptom of a much bigger problem, which is that our regulatory and administrative bodies have become very powerful and very intrusive into the lives of those that they regulate, or that they, it's not just even regulators, it's the administrative state more generally as well. And so we all have interactions with a growing state that gets to make decisions about our day-to-day lives, and in ways that are a lot more heavy-handed or intrusive than they used to be. And so it is a symptom of a bigger problem. It's not unique to this area, but that was certainly a concern of Dr. Gill's and other physicians as well, which is, why is the regulatory college stepping in and staking out a position and requiring all physicians to basically uphold and support public health edicts, essentially, which are largely political. I mean, we have to remember that public health is an arm of the state here in this respect. They are working hand in hand with government on policy, and they really should not be immune from criticism. And particularly when the public health measures that were taken in this instance flew in the face of 100 years worth of prior pandemic planning, and went with an entirely unheard of novel approach. To say that couldn't be criticized reasonably in the public square by physicians, or many others as well, but the physicians in particular had this regulatory ball and chain essentially around to curtail them. That was quite egregious as far as I was concerned.
And yet we've seen damaging effects from these kinds of investigations. I'm thinking about Dr. Crystal Lechque, Dr. Patrick Phillips, Dr. Mark Trosi. What is it about this case that sets it apart, where Dr. Gill has had her disciplinary hearing dropped and withdrawn, versus those other doctors who have faced harsh impositions by the college, including their loss of license? They can no longer treat patients. They're prevented from practicing medicine during a family doctor shortage, which has only been exacerbated by the way that the CPSO has conducted itself.
My understanding is that there were other elements to them as well, and that were absent in Dr. Gill's case. So her practice was totally compliant with public health measures. She was not issuing exemptions. That wasn't part of her practice anyway in her specialty area. And she was very cooperative with the college along the way in terms of, not interfering or objecting to the normal things that the college is allowed to do. So I don't know to what degree that was a distinction, but really this case was about her public speech primarily, and had no other elements other than just her right to basically communicate scientific opinions, medical opinions, her own opinions on really on matters that should be of public debate and interest. So there was perhaps a bit of a distinction in that respect.
Mm-hmm. What kind of precedents does this withdraw, if any, set for future proceedings, or even the bigger picture in terms of how the CPSO is meddled and really has this stranglehold on individual patient care?
Well, it doesn't set a precedent in this traditional legal sense, because there's no decision that comes out of it. It's just an indicator that for whatever reason, and your guess is as good as mine, they've decided not to proceed with this particular case. I don't think it necessarily means that they won't pursue other cases, but what it does suggest is that perhaps the environment for is just becoming a little bit less censorious in this area, now that there's just sort of been a constant stream of reputable journal articles and so on, and there were all along, but it's just a growing body now, showing that there are in fact lockdown harms. The things that Dr. Gill were saying back in 2020 and 2021 have been proven to be correct, and they were correct at the time, and they were demonstrably correct at the time, but they were not as popular or as permissible to say at that time. So basically, she was right. She was just early in being right.
If this is any indication that the tides may be turning, even just ever so slightly, how do we get away from this? How do we prevent something like this from happening again in the future, where doctors are censored and prevented from speaking up and just simply questioning whether or not what is being put down indiscriminately by public health, whether it is causing potential harms in the future?
Right. Well, I do hope that there's an opportunity for some reflection within these various organizations and regulatory bodies and public health generally. It may be that we need some legislative guidance in terms of what the regulators can actually start, regulating. I mean, when it's starting to go a little bit too far, as we've talked about some of these other cases. And it may be that some legislative tweaks are necessary to rein in these regulators a little bit. I certainly hope that they take some lessons away from this, because, as I said in my quote, one of the big concerns is not just the impact on the physician; it's the impact on the ability for the public to be able to trust these institutions. If anything is to come out of this that's very positive beyond just for the individual doctor, it is that these institutions will realize they're losing a lot of the public, and they are there to govern in the public interest. And the public includes this broad segment of the population that wasn't on board with all of this, that saw problems with it, and that has become increasingly distrustful. They need to be able to, if society is going to work, we have to have some trust in our institutions, or we're going to need new ones.
Trust in institutions is exactly why freedom of expression is so important. We all suffer when the arena of ideas is suppressed and censored for conformity to the state-sanctioned narrative. If you would like to help Dr. Gill with her legal fees or learn more about the work, then you can go to thedemocracyfund.ca. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. The Democracy Fund is a registered Canadian charity founded in 2021 with a focus on upholding constitutional rights. They host civil liberties events and provide free legal aid to Canadians who may otherwise be unable to do so on their own to access justice. If you would like to support their work through a tax-deductible donation, then please consider doing so at thedemocracyfund.ca. That's thedemocracyfund.ca.